Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight for Community Conversations. We have all of you here in person and as well as people online joining in and asking questions as well. I'm Mayor Angela Burney, and in a moment I'll have the council members each briefly introduce themselves. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well this evening. We're looking forward to our discussion as this is the first conversations we've had since the pandemic began. So it's been quite some time, so we're working through the kinks. So if at the end you have some suggestions how to make this experience better, we'd love to hear that for our next session that we'll probably do early in the next year. As we engage in tonight's conversation, I want to share our intent for this conversation to be educational, inviting, inquisitive, and respectful of different perspectives. We welcome comments and questions that will help us uphold the values of inclusiveness, welcoming, inviting, and diversity of perspectives. Thanks for being part of creating that environment in our community. And with that, in a moment, I'll ask council members to each introduce themselves, but just so you know, if you haven't been here in a while, we have restrooms right out there. We have some snacks out in the lobby if you need them. And other than that, I think we're good to go. So I think I'll start with Council President Potier, if you'd like to just briefly introduce yourself.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Tonica Potier. I have been on the council since 2017. I live in Education Hill with my family, have been involved with the community and served on Parks and Trails Commission and Planning Commission, and I'm coming to the end of my term, so happy to be here tonight and talk to all of you.
I'm David Carson. I've been on the council since 2008, and I think I've served as the chair of all of our council committees except for the Finance and Administration Committee. I serve on the Emergency Management Advisory Committee of King County, as well as the Planning and Public Works Chair of the Committee of the Whole for the council currently. So I think that's about it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Kritzer, and I've been on the council since January 2020, so about 3 months before we had to go virtual for a long time. So I'm really glad to be here in person with all of you. Before I was on council, I was actually on the Planning Commission here in Redmond, and I'm raising my 3-year-old daughter here in Redmond, and just love our community. On council, I have been the last 2 years serving as the presiding officer for the Finance Administration and Communications Committee. I also serve on 2 different committees, regional boards that work on salmon conservation, as well as one on conservation more broadly, the King Conservation District Advisory Committee. And I have a big passion for that topic. Also have been able to work on the Eastside Transportation Partnership and look a lot at some of our transportation issues in our area, as well as a couple other things, but I will pass it to some of my other council members. It gives you a little overview of some of the work I've been doing on council.
Good evening. Thank you very much for attending this evening. I'm excited to hear what you have to tell us. And my name is Jerry Anderson. I'm your City Council Vice President. I am serving on the council since 2017. I live in the Bear Creek neighborhood with my husband and stepdaughter. And I am currently representing you on the King County Regional Transit Committee, the Cascade Water Alliance, and the State Public Works Board. I'm trying to think if there's other ones. Probably. We're a little busy little extracurricular activities on the council, as well as being vice president, and looking forward to working with all of you this evening. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here in person and virtually. Really looking forward to hearing your questions and getting a chance to actually engage with our community. I am Jessica Forsyth. I have been on council since January 2020, as well as Ms. Kritzer. I am the chair of the Parks and Human Services Committee. I also serve on the Eastside Human Services Forum and on the East Trail Regional Advisory Council. And I'm looking forward to engaging in this conversation tonight. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And we have Councilmember Khan is joining us virtually this evening. Councilmember, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Varisha Khan. I use she, her pronouns. and I am excited to be here with you all tonight. I'm so glad you're all able to come out. I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and I have been serving on the council since 2020, just like some of my other fellow council members who just spoke as well too. But very excited to be here with you all, and also just want to acknowledge that we are joining in on stolen land of the Coast Salish people here in Redmond, Washington, and looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Great, thank you so much. So I have a whole stack of questions. So you might hear your questions, you might hear a modification of your question, you might hear an amalgamation of your question with other questions, but I hope to get through them all this evening. What I do ask you is, some of the questions I browsed through are pretty technical. We don't have staff here tonight to answer questions. This is the council members, so they'll do their best. We'll do our best, but some of the questions will be a little too technical for us to get you exact specific answers if you hear those. So what I'm going to do is I'll read out a question and I'll call on a couple of council members to answer it, and if someone else wants to chime in, and then we'll try to rotate, make sure everyone gets an opportunity to speak. That works for you all. So first we have Miss Eva Norling. No, she's here tonight. Is Eva here tonight? No. Eva, her question's on climate change. She asked, what are some of the things the city is doing to address climate change and sustainability? How are we breaking the status quo, since not addressing it will cost us dearly? So who would like to start in on that? Councilmember Kritzer, would you like to start in on that one? Would you like me to read it again?
No, sure. I think I got it. Yeah,
Okay, great.
Thank you. Well, I think it's very exciting that I would say across our council, we have a huge passion for working on protecting our environment and fighting climate change, and obviously see it as this threat that we need to address at the local level to be able to protect our planet for future generations. And one of the big things that we did in the past year or so, I think it was about a year ago, is that we passed an environmental sustainability action plan that's a 30-year plan that has focused strategies on how to reduce our carbon emissions, as well as to be able to make our city more sustainable. As part of that process, we actually declared a climate emergency here in Redmond and set some even more ambitious goals within there, including committing our city to become carbon neutral by 2030 in terms of our municipal operations. And I'm excited to share with all of you, if you didn't see it last week, that we just passed our carbon neutrality strategy. That's basically a plan of exactly how we're going to get to be carbon neutral by 2030, and which includes a lot of great things, including really like greening our fleet. And we just passed some great investments in terms of EV infrastructure here in our city. So, and I think what's great is that we also have some really great staff that have been using data to attack this problem, and being able to model out and figure out what are all of the different pieces of the ways that we contribute to emissions, both here in our city and then within our own kind of footprint of the city operations. And then on top of that, what are the things we can do to encourage every person in our community, in their own house, in their own footprint, to reduce their carbon emissions. And I'd say one of the big things that I'm looking forward to us working on is, that's a part of a lot of that strategy, is also making sure that as our community develops and grows, that our buildings can be greener. Because one of the biggest contributors to climate change is carbon emissions from buildings. So if we can make sure that as buildings are built here, as well as ones that get retrofit, can be more energy efficient, then we can take a really big whack at some of the big contributors to climate change, in my opinion. So I'll let others jump in on some of their other thoughts on this. I know we all care about it a lot.
Would anyone else like to add to that question? Councilmember Forsyth?
I think Ms. Kritzer did a great job of answering the question, so there's not a ton to add, but I will say with our climate emergency declaration, there were a lot of really actionable goals in there, and we joined about 5 other cities in the state, and so that really made us a leader on climate mitigation and climate change actions. And I've heard from neighboring cities and council members from neighboring cities that they have been looking to us and looking at our structure to see what we're doing, because we are truly becoming a leader in this arena.
Great, thank you. Council President?
Thank you. I think my fellow council members gave a lot of details. A couple things, we did get an environmental sustainability manager. She's the one that helped us put together the 30-year sustainability plan, which is really exciting to have her guiding us on this journey, and having her expertise has been super helpful. And the other thing that we did as a council is decide that we wanted committee space to talk about sustainability issues. So that has been added to public safety. Now I think it's been almost 3 months, and Councilmember Khan is the one that's been chairing that. So those are a couple other efforts that we've been making towards sustainability. Thank you.
Great. Council Vice President Anderson, would you like to answer or add to that?
So we talked a lot about carbon emissions, and appreciate all the other comments from the council members, but one of the other really unique features of our climate emergency declaration is a net zero water footprint as well. So just thinking about other things like infrastructure, other types of resources, including energy. We had a green energy policy that we passed early in my term on council. So we're moving in the right direction in a lot of different ways. And I just wanted to mention that some of the inspiration for the climate emergency goals actually came from one of our big neighbors in our backyard, which is Microsoft. So a lot of that collaboration with our local partners is a really important key part of that, and helping us get to where we need to be here in Redmond. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm just letting Councilmember Khan know that if she wants to answer a question, just raise her hand. So typing and speaking at the same time is a little hard. So just let me know any of the questions you want to answer. Great. Well, thank you all very much for that. We have more sustainability questions in here tonight as well. Our next question is from Michael, I'm going to say his last name wrong, Proux, P-R-O-U-L-X. He is asking, are there plans to make Redmond more pedestrian friendly? We know pollution from cars has many negative effects that have been long known. How is Redmond not pedestrian friendly? Take a walk. Each traffic light is programmed with cars in mind. The buttons are not standardized. The audio signals are misleading at crossings, and striped crossings are often ignored by drivers, both at lights and near parks and schools, making crossings scary. Would anyone like to talk about that one? Councilmember Forsyth, thank you.
I would absolutely love to make Redmond more walkable. I've been out on, I'll call them a roll along with one of our community members who uses a wheelchair. And they showed me just how good our city could be if we connected some of these missing links. We have a trail right here that goes all the way through downtown, and it's just got some missing sections that we really need to focus on to have a truly wonderfully vibrant, walkable downtown. I also want to invest in crosswalk signaling, and even explore the potential idea of diagonal crosswalks so that traffic is stopped. There are a lot of intersections where you can't necessarily make a turn even when you have the light. So I think if we look at some of those more busy intersections and we have diagonal crossing, it's much more safe. It's a much more European way of thinking, but I've personally used them when I lived in New Zealand, and it makes the entire downtown area a much more walkable, friendly, pedestrian city. So yes, I would love, if my fellow council members agree, that we could really do a lot to make the city much more walkable, especially thinking that we have light rail coming soon and all the growth and development that's happening downtown.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share their thoughts on sidewalks and safety? Councilmember Kritzer, is that you?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Councilmember Forsyth just said. I think especially as we plan, I mean, it's in less than a year and a half until we get the light rail coming to Redmond. We have to think about how people can get around, both walking and biking in a safe way if we want people to be able to connect in through transit. Kind of getting back to also that last conversation we were just having, also if we want people to make more sustainable transit choices, we have to make it very safe for people to get around. I think in particular in the areas like downtown where we call it a pedestrian zone, that really thinking about how we plan in the future so that it actually is the safest for pedestrians is really important. Upcoming, as part of the work we're doing with the comprehensive plan, we're working on an update to our transportation master plan. And I think that's a really good opportunity for us as we really dig in for the next couple decades to look ahead at what we want to prioritize in terms of infrastructure investments, in terms of how we plan out our city and all those connections holistically to make safety at the center of that. One thing that I'm hoping we might be able to do in the upcoming time is even to join the national network of Vision Zero cities, which are cities that are committed to reducing pedestrian and bicycle deaths to zero. I think that would be a cool goal for us to do, and to think about how we really plan in a way where safety is one of the top things. So that's, I think, going to be an upcoming conversation in the year ahead. So I really look forward to that for all of us.
Councilmember Carson?
Thank you. So one of the things that I think is great that we've already taken action and is near fruition is the light rail. And the thing that's interesting about light rail is not just getting to it, but also that within the envelope of the light rail, when you get to downtown, there is a trail that's integrated right next to the light rail. So you'll be able to get from Marymore Village to downtown on your bike or walking on a trail that is, you'll have a couple of crossings, but they're pretty, it's nicely aligned with light rail. So if basically you're a block off of Cleveland, you're able to get to all sorts of businesses really easily. And that was, that whole corridor is really a multi-purpose corridor in that it's got a ton of different utilities below grade, and it's got the trail as well as obviously light rail that will be above grade to come into downtown so that it doesn't impact traffic. So that whole corridor is going to be a huge link to connect, a new part of our city, which is Over Lake Village. Sorry, I meant Marymore Village, with the downtown. And also, it's a vital connection between, up in Overlake, we've got, as a part of the Sound Transit development, we've got 2 pedestrian bridges that'll span 520. And anybody who knows that area, it's typically not been a very easy place to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist. So it's going to give us options that we've just never had before, and I think it's going to be a real nice addition to the city.
Thank you. Anyone else? Council Vice President Anderson?
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm actually a sustainable transportation professional, so I love this conversation. But one of the things that is really fun to know about Redmond is, I think in 2013 or 2015, excuse me if I don't have the history, I was not on council, but the city of Redmond's adopted what's called a complete streets policy. And so that means whenever we invest in infrastructure, we make sure that we are completing gaps in our network. And we're also focusing on bike, pedestrian, and transit-related infrastructure. And I think one of the things that I've seen in the last year or two since we started our 2050 comprehensive planning update is we've been talking a little bit on council about 10-minute or 15-minute cities, with the goal of you being able to get to work or home or someplace to play within 10 to 15 minutes by foot, in theory. So that's kind of the big vision, I guess, in the next couple of years. Hopefully you'll see some of the outcomes of that. But I think Ms. Kritzer mentioned investing in infrastructure, and of course, how it actually works. What Ms. Forsyth mentioned is really important too, and what Mr. Carson has mentioned too. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Khan?
Thank you. Well, I agree with everything my fellow council members just said. And what I hear is the value of sustainability in our planning for safety of sidewalks. I hear accessibility and truly making Redmond a walkable and better accessible city. And so for that reason, I mean, I'm so glad that we were able to do a number of our planning and budget work this past year, or the last year rather, in investing in our pedestrian and even bike infrastructure and safety. We included $25,000 for our bike and pedestrian program in the 2020 budget. And of course, that's a small piece, and our staff has done a great job of really working on ways to invest in the vision for the future of what pedestrian safety and planning looks like. What do our sidewalks look like? How does how do we connect different areas, as everyone spoke about earlier. And so I really want to, emphasize that, yes, we do have plans in place, we're working on plans, but we do require a lot of input and feedback. And, hearing stories about how Redmond residents get around, or people who come to work in Redmond get around, it's so helpful for us in a lot of that decision making, whether it is in our plans or whether it's in our budgeting. This past, or a couple of weeks ago, rather, me and Councilmember Forsyth participated in a week without driving, led by the Disability Mobility Initiative. And getting around Redmond, I will say, was a lot more challenging than I expected, whether it was by walking, whether it was by bus. There definitely are a number of challenges, whether you walk or whether you get around by wheelchair, whether you push a stroller with your kids, whether you walk your dog. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement in our city. And so the 2022 budget is coming up soon. And so it would be great to be able to hear your feedback in how we plan for the future of walkability in our city when that time comes as well.
Great, thank you so much. And one thing that's interesting in listening to this is thinking about how Redmond's changing from more car-centric to more light rail pedestrian friendly, and thinking the different ways that we manage traffic and manage people through our city. To Councilmember Forsyth about the all-way cross. One of my daughters went to college back east, and they changed one of their major intersections to an all-way cross. And yeah, it slowed the cars down briefly, but then when everyone can cross, everyone's gotten where they need to be, then the cars can resume their travel. And I think over time, things like that can really make a big difference for us in our safety and opportunities for people to get around. Councilmember Forsyth?
I just wanted to add on to the week without driving that Councilmember Khan and I participated in. At the end of the week, I was feeling pretty bad that I was doing remote meetings and walking places and not necessarily taking a bus. So I looked up my home walkability score, and you guys can look it up too. I think it's just walkscore.com. And I felt a little better about my experience once I realized that it's 0 to 100, that my home is a 43. But then I got really curious about the rest of the city. So I started Googling addresses, or doing the walkability score for addresses on Education Hill, and it dropped to the low 30s. So we really have some work to do to make sure that our entire community is actually connected and able to walk and bus and get proper access to all of the great things that are coming to the city.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Nope. Council President Poitier?
Thank you. My fellow council members gave fabulous answers. Thank you, Vice President Anderson, for bringing up the 10-minute communities. That's also been a passion of mine. Also, want to encourage all of you to participate in the Redmond Comprehensive Plan 2050 planning. We need to hear from you what you want your city to look like in the future. Also I think it's important we know that we've been focusing on urban centers and making sure that we have all the amenities in those centers, but how do we connect people who live in Grass Lawn neighborhood or Education Hill or South Redmond to the light rail, making sure that we have transportation options so people don't have to get in their cars and pedestrians and cyclists have more room to move about the city. So thank you.
Thank you. And I have a comment from one of our listeners online that said, I'm excited for the Vaporwave mural tunnel along the light rail trail. So if you've had the opportunity to go into the light rail trail on the opposite side of 520, there's a really beautiful mural that people can ride their bikes through and walk through. And it's just part of our network that we've been building as light rail's coming. So thank you for that comment, Felix. Next we have Lisa Brook I'm going to summarize some of this because it's long. I have questions about the Health Through Housing project in Redmond. Is it possible for Redmond to issue a conditional use permit for this project that would be reviewed, renewed on an annual or other periodic basis? One of my concerns is that Redmond needs to have meaningful recourse under any of the following circumstances. If King County doesn't run the program in the manner advised, if Redmond's not allowed to participate in a meaningful manner, or if the housing program is not successful for either the occupants or their surrounding community. So that is the question from this individual. Would anyone like to chime in on that? Vice President Anderson, thank you.
This sounds like a yes or no question. And I think the answer is yes.
Yes, I think that is the answer. That there are opportunities for Redmond to step in.
I
if
think we're
the-
still working on the occupancy agreement
Yeah.
part. So that would be a part of the terms and conditions of that agreement is what I understand.
Yeah. So that would be part of the conditions of the agreement. We did have a survey out. I hope people that took advantage of chiming in on that to help us get input into this process that we're in with King County. Oh, yes, Councilmember Kritzer.
Yeah, and I would just add on that, because I know there's been a lot of discussion around what are the ways in which we will coordinate with King County on this. And I think one of the big opportunities coming up is that on November 23rd, we're going to have a study session to be able to start talking about that occupancy agreement. And within the occupancy agreement, we will actually put together, what are some of the terms that we'd like to see of the way that that facility will run. And we'll share that with the county, and basically between the county council and our council, we'll have to agree on that before the facility would open. But also, we won't be able to do all of that agreement until they actually select an operator as well. So that's something that we're tracking with the county. But I did want, since I think everyone has been asking a lot of questions, to just clarify that, there won't be any, the housing will not open until there is an agreed upon occupancy agreement, and that's something that our council will vote on. So that's something that we're planning to do as work in the time ahead, starting with our discussion on the 23rd of November.
Thank you. Anyone else? Council President Potier.
I'll just add that our police chief did tell us that there will be a safety agreement or plan as well before the facility opens that they will be working on. And along with the occupancy agreement, we will probably be working on an interlocal agreement. I personally won't be at the table, but I have great faith in my council members. We've heard your concerns that we're going to do a good job on this. Thank you.
And that would be both of our chiefs, fire chief and police chief. They'll be working on that safety plan for that facility.
Chief Shepherd as well.
Yeah. Anyone else? No? All right. The next question is on tree canopy. I'm wondering what the plans are to achieve the goal of increasing the Redmond tree canopy by 40%. I live in the general Overlake area. This area has seen significant decrease in the tree canopy due to development. The old group health site, the Sound Transit construction, the Microsoft campus redevelopment. This has significant consequences for my neighborhood in terms of heat, air quality, and noise. It would make sense to me to replace trees that have been lost in the area where they have been removed. How is the city planning to do this? Councilmember Carson?
Well, yeah, obviously development kind of hampers tree canopy because you have to take down trees to be able to put up buildings in certain places. And obviously we look at the development that Microsoft's done is it's really a gigantic project. They will be required to, sometimes it depends on the type of trees, but sometimes it'll be 3 to 1, sometimes it'll be 1 to 1 that they'll have to replace those trees that were taken down. So each development is kind of its own thing that has to be evaluated based on what's being done. Now, there's a lot of other ideas on the council about things like, tree giveaways and and we're looking at all of those kinds of things to encourage people to plant, new trees. I planted 2 new trees in my yard this summer. Had to take one out, but at some point, encouraging people to plant on their own property. I mean, we're basically doing all of the above. We're planting offsite sometimes when it's not feasible to replant on a development. For example, in downtown, you'll have an entire block that had maybe street trees or things, and now the building's being built up to the edge. So obviously they can't plant replacement trees on site. So we have locations for them to plant those trees so that we get the new benefit of new trees. And usually it depends on the size that they're taking down, but it's either a 1 to 1 or a 3 to 1. And I think all of us are really motivated to make sure that our tree canopy is ever growing. We're looking at things like street trees. and how we can pick the right trees for the long-term, because if you've walked downtown, you'll see that some of the trees are causing problems with sidewalks. And so it really takes the right tree in the right place, which has been kind of a theme as we've talked about it, where, not every tree is the right tree in your yard or as a street tree. So making sure that when you plant something, you understand what it's going to do, what its roots are going to do. And because that can mean that it maybe only lasts for 10 years and then you've got to do something about it. So, so if you're considering that, and I do encourage everybody to look at where they could plant trees on their own property, do make sure that you're looking at the long-term impact of what that tree will do, because you don't want to have to take it out in a few years just to replace it with the right tree. So.
Any other comments? Councilmember Kritzer?
Yeah, and I just say thanks to, I see a few of you in the audience who came out just the other weekend for Green Redmond Day. One of the programs that we have here in Redmond to help to plant more trees is a partnership with Forterra. And actually, I learned on that day this year when I went to Smith Woods, and I think some of the other council members went over to Farrell McWhirter to plant trees, is that since 2009, we've planted over 12,000 trees through that program in Redmond, which is pretty cool. And then even more in terms of shrubs and smaller plants that are really important for our ecosystem. But that's all through people coming out, volunteering, planting those trees. So I think I'd love to look for more opportunities to be able to do that and to harness that excitement from the community. Because honestly, I think the signups for Green Redmond Day filled up in one day because so many people wanted to come out and help plant trees. So I'm wondering, what we can do in the future to be able to, where people want to invest in planting more trees and want to do that work, since actually the people and the cost, like the people power and the cost of the trees are some of our barriers to not getting more. So that's been something I've brought up a couple times, that I wonder if we could make a, like donate a tree to Redmond, kind of like if anyone wants to donate a tree in honor of someone, that we could make it easy for you to be able to do that. It's something I think would be cool for us to do. But yeah, I think that's one area that is proactive for us. The other thing is that right now our planning commission are actually looking at our tree regulations and whether there are some updates we could do to make sure that we're protecting our trees more. One that I'm personally going to be watching and that will be coming to us is whether we make sure that we hold arborists accountable for following the policies that we have. Because we have some policies that say things like certain trees you can't cut down. Other trees you have to have you have to have a reason for. You also can only cut down a certain number of trees on your property. But most people, individuals, aren't going to know all the different things they need to do or all the permits they need to get. But they're also not going to have the capacity to cut down a tree themselves. They usually have an arborist come do it. And so where we see sometimes happens, and I know this happened in my neighborhood, I saw someone cut down a bunch of trees they shouldn't have with the use of an arborist. Part of it is because maybe we don't have enough kind of teeth in our regulations or fines that are high enough if arborists themselves do not ask, do you have a permit? Have you followed these policies? So I think that's one way that we might be able to incentivize everyone to follow the policies we actually have in place and make sure that we're protecting the trees that we have, because we can plant trees after they've been cut down, but it's hard to replace something that's been there for hundreds of years. It's not quite the same to replace it with a smaller new tree, in my opinion. So that's one area that I'm looking at. I'll give you that geeky answer of something I'm looking at.
Councilmember Forsyth.
Just to add on to that, thank you for the arborist conversation, because I think that is one area we definitely need to focus. And we've seen a lot of trees come down when people don't actually know. I've seen that conversation on Nextdoor so many times where a neighbor is upset that a tree came down and they went over and asked and there was no permit. So I think that's something we should absolutely be looking into. I also recently received an email from a community member. I don't know if any of you were stuck in the traffic the other night when that tree came down over across, it was Avondale? Yeah, Redmond Way. but the email came through about the city potentially replacing trees that fall. And I thought that was a really interesting idea that we as a council could adopt as a policy when a big tree like that comes down, that we take that action to go ahead and replace it and make sure the ground is stable and all of that, but make sure that we as a city have a policy that we potentially take that step to replace that tree and make sure that we are keeping up with our tree canopy. One thing I learned during the tree planting Green Redmond days was that the trees that we're planting don't necessarily count towards our tree canopy for many, many years. So while we're doing a lot of that work, we may not see the benefits of that for at least maybe 5 to 10 years. So just know that those trees are going in. There were, gosh, I want to say 100 of us at least out there a couple weeks ago, planting those trees and making sure that we have the best shot at continuing the growth of our tree canopy.
Thank you. Councilmember Kritzer?
I just remembered something I meant to say, and now you've inspired me to say one other thing, which is I will say, if you want to go check out an interesting area where we're going to have a lot of growth in the future, is to look out when you go along Avondale in the kind of Bear Creek area. You can see the Keller Farm wetland area, and there are just thousands of trees that are planted there that are very small right now that are going to grow over time. And eventually that's going to be, I didn't realize that because right now it looks just like a big field, like a really, really large field. But it's actually going to be this amazing forested area. And it's actually a place also where we have some key salmon passages going through. And as we have more trees there, it'll provide shaded places for salmon to be able to go through and do their migration. And a lot of people don't realize just how critical our community is for providing a lot of that salmon migration and habitat. So just wanted to bring that up. And then the other part is that in terms of tree canopy, one of the things that we've talked about with a new environmental sustainability dashboard that we're creating here in the city is to have a section that's going to track our tree canopy. And I think on all of our sustainability goals, it's going to be great. Our council made the decision actually in the last budget to invest in having a public-facing dashboard that will allow us to hold ourselves accountable to a lot of our sustainability goals and allow the public to be able to see that. And I'm excited to have tree canopy as a part of that. So it's still in development, but hoping we're going to get a preview of that soon.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Yang. She asks, what data did you use to determine that this project, the Health Through Housing site, would have a neutral or positive effect on the community? Councilmember Carson?
Well, I'll take that one because, so it's not our project. The county is the one who purchased it. So I don't think, and certainly the council has not asked or authorized any spending to evaluate that as a site. It is not our project to evaluate. It is the county's. That said, we will have hopefully a very large say in what happens in terms of the execution on the ground and the impacts, therefore, to the community. So that is the part that we will play as we develop some interlocal agreements, as well as have input on the resident agreement and the selection of the operator of the facility. So there are a number of things that the council will take up over the next few months to make sure that this is something that will be successful in terms of helping people and will do the best to diminish the impact to the rest of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Anyone else? Another follow-up question. James is asking, why is the city of Redmond not included or funded additional security initiatives such as video monitoring or controlled access for permanent supportive housing facilities? And I think Councilmember Carson's answers this as well. It's really King County's project. Councilmember Carson, did you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there are requirements that we will be fashioning to make sure that some things we'll have purview on. And, it is, again, not our project, but we believe that we'll be working with the county to develop some things that will make it successful. It's my hope that it is treated not as a place to warehouse people, but to actually rehabilitate and get them into productive society. So, that it's going to take a willing partner in the county as well as the operator, and certainly our police and fire department, as well as I think Bellevue Police and Fire, are going to be integral parts of that as well. So.
Anyone else? Council Vice President Anderson, and then Councilmember Kritzer.
So I think the fundamental question that was at the beginning was, what data did we use to decide? And Mr. Carson addressed the did we decide piece of that, but what other data that does exist on permanent supportive housing includes some that I've actually personally attended a presentation on some of our nonprofit partners. They have done a number of presentations and invited the council to those as well. I personally attended one from the Sophia Way, and I found it compelling that some of the information on permanent supportive housing as a solution is sort of healthcare through housing. The issue that did come up was that it's about 3 times less expensive than a night in jail. And then there's other cost-related data on that as well. So in order to provide services to these individuals that need support and address their chronic issues, it can be a cost-effective solution. So that while council has not reviewed that research directly, I'm adding that to this conversation because that is some research I've done personally on this topic. And you can find some of that at endhomelessness.org and a couple other resources and references as well.
Councilmember Kritzer.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Vice President Anderson. I think, yeah, that's, for me, I've done quite a bit of research into this topic and into what are some of the most data-driven and evidence-based strategies to be able to reduce homelessness. And when you actually, I was actually quite compelled by a presentation I was able to watch by Challenge Seattle earlier this year, which is a group of leaders, especially coming from different businesses in the area, that really wanted to be able to see us regionally kind of address the issue of homelessness. And it's headed up actually by former Governor Christine Gregoire. She was giving the presentation. And one of the things that they found, they looked at cities that have been the most effective at reducing their rates of chronic homelessness. And the #1 thing that those cities used was permanent supportive housing. So there's quite a bit of data actually on it, which, and interestingly enough, from all of those businesses, their ask to our region was that we invest the most in that particular resource, as well as other types of strategies. So I think that for me, it was pretty interesting. I would say that I think there's an opportunity here for us to be able to use this to be able to give, 144 people a home. That's what we're talking about. And give them, especially for people who really want to exit homelessness and exit poverty, to give them, behavioral health services, career searching services, to help them to actually have, a home where they can close the door, lock the door, and then be able to live happy, healthy lives. That actually could be a really cool thing for our community to be able to do, is to provide that, even if we weren't the ones who made the decision. And I think, so anyway, I just wanted to say that I think, and if we do this in a way that's engaged with our community around us, as well as with the people who will live within there, we can have it be a successful project. I think one of the other things on the question about security, a few meetings ago, we had some presentations from our program we now call Redmond Thrive, which is a whole host of really great resources we have in the city. If you all didn't get a chance to watch it, just would encourage you. We have specialists who currently work on homeless outreach. We have specialists who work on the human services and behavioral health side. We have people, a mental health professional who works with our police. We have people within our fire department that do casework with people who have reoccurring calls to 911 to actually help them get the resources that they need. And all those different people in our city, they work together when they find people in need or people in crisis to be able to make sure that those needs are addressed. And I just, wanted to share, I really think that's going to be the strength as we look at this project, is that we can draw on all that great experience and expertise of wonderful staff we have in our city to be able to say, are there needs in that area? Are we hearing anything? Connecting with the community around to listen and say, what are you seeing? Are there more needs? And then to actually address those and to have kind of all of our plans coming together to be able to make this a success. So I'm optimistic and appreciate all the feedback from the community on it, but just will say, let's keep the dialogue going. Let's keep working together to make this really successful.
Council Vice President? Gentlemen, this is, okay.
Of all the experts.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, this is, I would really like you to.
You mentioned none had anything to do with people in the area and how it's going to affect their life.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Councilmember Kritzer mentioned the Thrive program that we have, and if you haven't received this in the mail, you will if you live in the city of Redmond, but if you don't, we also have these that are a focus, and they have more information on that if you want to pick one up on your way out as well. They're just sitting up here.
Excuse me, respectfully, just will we have an opportunity as members of the audience who showed up to have a dialogue, as the council member mentioned, and ask a few questions?
Well, that was what the cards were for, so I've been going through these, and as you can see, I have a large stack, but I've been trying to make sure I disperse different questions in there. So if your question's in here, it has a good chance of getting asked.
I'm trying to respond to some of the new information that we learned during this meeting. Respectfully, if that's okay.
Maybe I'll set aside a little time at the end so we have a little bit more time for that, if that would be all right. Thank you. So anyway, these are up here. Council Vice President?
I'd also like to address the question behind the question, which is how are we going to keep track of data on this particular project? And the answer is we haven't talked about that yet, but I think it is an open-ended conversation. And if you have ideas or thoughts on what data, I know we've heard a ton of suggestions on what that needs to look like. I've also talked with Leo Fleur, who's the CEO of the program, and they said they would be interested in having some sort of data sharing between the city and King County, because ultimately, if the project does or does not work out, we will need to know why and be able to understand what, and collect enough information for us to be able to make some of those decisions as it goes forward. So just wanted to make sure I covered a couple things. One was, is there data on permanent supportive housing that we have looked at? Some individuals on council may or may not have done so. Can we structure an agreement with the county so that we can collect data to address some of the concerns that have come up from the community? Yes, that is true, as well as this belief that all of council has supported a housing first approach throughout all of our city action plans, in our housing action plan, our funding, and other programs throughout the city. So you will see that throughout the council, and you are welcome to hold us accountable for that.
Great, thank you all. The next one is back to sidewalks. I walk my neighborhood every day and have fallen twice due to sidewalks not being kept clean. They're full of moss, leaves, needles. I'm 61, I often walk on the streets instead. Do you have a system to keep sidewalks clean like we do streets? Councilmember Carson.
Well, I'll just say this is a great place to pitch the app that we have called Your Redmond. It's available on iOS and Android. And if you see things that need maintenance, moss is certainly slippery when wet. And so if you see a moss accumulation or leaves, it kind of depends on where it is in your community, because you may have a shared area that is the homeowners associations to do or something like that. But generally sidewalks, it's supposed to be the homeowner that affronts the sidewalk. Sometimes there's a stretch of our sidewalk that nobody lives, you know, it's a green belt behind it. So that's one of those where we have weekly maintenance come in to do that. But leaves are obviously kind of a fleeting thing. Moss is kind of semi-permanent, and so I would definitely suggest in those cases where it needs maintenance, like pressure washing or something to remove the moss, that's something you could report to through our app. Broken culverts, any kind of problem with the storm drains, those are good things. And obviously, just keeping your storm drain clear of leaves is a very good idea to keep localized flooding from happening. So it really depends on where it is, but generally the app is a good place to start, and you can take a picture, and it'll, if you actually do it at the location, it'll put it on the map right for you, and you can submit it and get it into our system. So I use it weekly, and reporting things like I reported there's a street sign that had been apparently run over by some kind of vehicle. And so it was like this in downtown Redmond. And so I reported it, and they took care of it. So it's a very handy app, and I encourage you to use it because it's the way that staff can be notified of things that are not right.
Yeah, it's called Your Redmond. If you, they posted it on the chat in here, but if you're here, it's called Your Redmond. You can get it at the App Store. You do have to register, but what that gets you is that when you report things, you'll actually get an email or contact back saying where it is in the system. So it's pretty simple to use and really helpful. Councilmember Forsyth?
I think one other thing that we as the council could do, and the idea has bounced around a couple of times, is some sort of policy and fine structure to ensure that folks are actually cleaning up their areas of the sidewalks. I know other cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and even in those heavy winters, they charge you like $50 if you don't clear your sidewalk. I don't want to do anything that steep, but something that we could do to ensure that our neighbors who are out walking, our neighbors who have to use the sidewalks and use a wheelchair to get around, that is actually safe for them to do if those sidewalks are cleared and we're keeping up with that maintenance. And also keeping our storm drains clear. I know there was a recent program that the city just promoted that is Adopt a Storm Drain. And I saw one of our community members that took away, I think it was over 20 pounds of wet debris before that big storm to ensure that the streets didn't get flooded. So that's a really awesome program that we have. I think you can find that on the website if you want to adopt a storm drain. But again, with the app that you can report the sidewalks, go ahead and make sure you do that. I know there were some sidewalks in my neighborhood when I would go out for a run, it was actually safer to run in the bike lane because of tripping hazards. And I know recently those sidewalks were kind of sheared down. Then maintenance came out and made it so it's much safer to walk. Maybe not the easiest to roll, but much safer to walk without those tripping hazards.
Anything else? Council President?
Thank you. I also agree with having some sort of accountability and also just to keep pushing forth the community programs. I kind of unofficially adopted the drain in my cul-de-sac, so I've been a little bit obsessive about clearing out leaves, and I think it does make a difference when people are trying to walk or ride their bikes that they don't slip through big pileups of leaves and water. Also, I know when we've had those ice storms in the past, we just get everybody out, every family with a shovel, and we just start clearing away because we know that those ice trucks cannot make it into our little neighborhood with the cul-de-sac. So getting to know your neighbors, making sure that everyone is okay and has access in those times of emergency when city resources can't come right away to help. And then of course, reporting through the app like Mr. Carson mentioned. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. This card is from Dr. Gliboff. Since it's almost Veterans Day, I want to draw attention to the VA's Housing First program. They've shown as most helpful and cost-effective to house people first, then provide help with drugs, employment, and mental health. No question, just a comment. We have a renter question. We have a renter in the basement of a split level on the street, only has access to his space via the garage. Is that even legal? It doesn't seem safe in an emergency. I don't know that answer.
Mayor Bernie, I couldn't hear you very well. Would you, it's
Oh,
a
sorry.
little, I think it's a little muted with your microphone, if you could.
Okay, I'll try. We have a renter in the basement. Can you hear me better? Yeah. Okay. A split level on the street who only has access to his space via the garage. Is that even legal?
That's a question for code enforcement.
That is a technical question that we don't know the answer to. We would suggest you writing into the, use the app and to write into the city and probably get your question answered. Okay, yes, the app, someone asked on the chat, yes, the app can be for code enforcement as well.
Yeah, it's basically everything you can possibly think of, you can report. Truly,
They'll find a home for it.
truly, yeah.
Let's see. There's one on affordable housing. Affordable housing in the Overlake area is also a problem. New transit opportunities would make sense to increase affordable housing. The new development of the old group health site includes thousands of units, yet less than 300 are designated for low income. It seems this is an opportunity wasted. What are plans to increase affordable housing in the city, especially near transit? Council Vice President, would you like to start? And then Council
Tonica got
President?
it first.
Okay, Council President.
You probably have a more articulate answer than I do. I serve on the Affordable Housing Commission, and King County is going to task all of us with providing a certain amount of housing. We're required by the Growth Management Act to be able to handle the growth that's coming our way, and affordability is a huge part of it. Everybody that works and lives in Redmond should be able to afford to live in Redmond, in my opinion. There are lots of opportunities with what we have, inclusionary zoning. We have done oh yeah, I guess I should, yeah. Inclusionary zoning means when somebody builds a development, that 10% of those units must be affordable based on the current AMI, affordable medium income. And then also, we have the multi-family tax exemption, so that different tax credits can be earned by developers by setting aside more affordable units. That said, we have been keeping close track of how many units we have in our city, how many more are needed, and we have our work cut out for us. We have to keep creating opportunities and encouraging developers to be able to build this housing so that we have different choices of housing and we have them at different price points. So I wish I had a nice answer that was like tied with a bow, but it's a work in progress, and I hope that the council will continue this work as we go into Redmond 2050 planning. Thank you.
Council Vice President?
Sure, I'll add to that. Some things that have been pretty exciting to work on in the last term have been our housing action plan, and we did have a conversation about what housing diversity needs to look like in this city, which did include also the conversation around whether or not we keep our 10% minimum for affordable housing, making buildings taller, a lot of a variety of different incentives, homes that are not just single one-bedroom units, the boxy but good type of framework downtown, those kinds of things. And so we've had those conversations, and I believe that's happening, and I could be wrong about this, but many of those thoughts are getting integrated into our 2050 comprehensive plan, and then all of those pieces will fit together in our big housing action plan going forward as a housing strategy. So I'm looking forward to some of that stuff. In terms of making sure that affordability is spread throughout the city and not necessarily just concentrated and more decentralized. So,
Councilmember Kritzer?
Yeah, and one piece that I was also excited about that was a part of the housing action plan included also thinking about what types of, protections and support we need for tenants, especially if we're going to be having a different diversity of housing, is making sure that for renters that they have the protection and support that they need to be able to stay in the housing that they're in, especially given those pressures. One thing that we have had as a huge focus in the last 2 years, during the pandemic, pandemic, when there's been, an incredible amount of people that have been in crisis and struggling to pay rent, has been ensuring that we're providing rental assistance and support to people in our community. Now, some of the model has shifted where King County is providing a lot of that, but in kind of the main part of the pandemic, that was one area of focus for our council, as well as looking at places where we could do advocacy at the state level to make sure that the supports came in, and in particular where we could also take some of the burden off of people. For example, for utilities, making sure that people's utilities wouldn't be shut off if they were struggling during this time, or not being charged late fees, as some legislation that we passed to be able to make sure that, people who've been having a hard time getting through this pandemic can stay in their housing, and that we don't exacerbate some of our crises that we have in our region of people struggling with housing, who are at the low income level. So that's something that I'm very proud that we've been able to do as we've moved through this pandemic. And then I think, moving forward, as we're hopefully coming into a recovery and looking at what does a recovery look like that is equitable. I think that's going to be another part of our conversation, along with grappling with all of these questions around growth that my colleagues spoke to.
Thank you. Councilmember Carson?
So I just wanted to mention one other aspect that happened in the last 10 years and it takes a long time for buildings to come out of the ground. So, and neighborhoods, it takes even longer. So, but what we've seen is we've actually taken an area that was semi-industrial and turned it in, because of light rail, it became clear that it was a good candidate for becoming a residential, kind of mixed residential and commercial neighborhood. And that is the Marymore Village. We had already embarked on council to make Overlake Village a more residential place. So if you look at what's happening in those neighborhoods now, and they weren't really living neighborhoods at the time, they all have living units. There's a mix of market rate with the 10% affordable, as Councilmember Potier mentioned. There's some that are, an entire building is affordable housing, and that's in the Overlake area. And then we've had developers take advantage of the tax, the multifamily tax exempt status, which exempts them from taxes for a certain period to incent them to offer more affordable units. So, and that's happened in the Overlake Village area. And what we basically started a new neighborhood from scratch, actually kind of twice, because Overlake Village wasn't really, at least on the Redmond side, wasn't really a real living neighborhood. It was more office buildings and the like. So, and of course, group health, that group health property was a big part of that. And now you see it's very much a walkable, and it's a really interesting place to hang out, and I think it'll be even more interesting when kind of we're freed up from the pandemic aspects of life right now. So, but I guess that to say is that it really takes a long time for a neighborhood to come into its own. And so we will see in the next, as we get light rail, we'll see those two parts of town become really vibrant places for people to live. And we're already seeing businesses locate there. I think they're going to be fun places to catch, little concerts in the park and things like that. So, and with the proximity to Marymore Park from Marymore Village, that's very much a draw in terms of people wanting to live in that part of town. So I think, it takes a long time to make some of these things happen, but we're finally starting to see the benefits of work that was done 12 and 14 years ago. So I'm happy that I've kind of been here that whole time to be able to see it. Because, we made decisions back in 2008 and 9 that we're finally seeing the buildings be finalized and people living in them. So that for me is very exciting, and it does contribute to affordability and the fact that we now have more units, there's more supply. So obviously, that supply and demand equation is going to be where the price is. So anyway, I think it's great to see all those things happen, and I hope you'll check out those areas of town as they kind of come into their own.
So I'm going to go Councilmember Forsyth, Councilmember Kritzer,
Oh, no.
and Council President Pattier.
I've ignited something.
Got a roll.
No, I think we've all done a really good job here of answering this one, but I just wanted to add on to this, that we've had a lot of conversations about looking at our zoning. I know Council President Pattier mentioned this, but I'm really excited about that conversation because there's so many opportunities. I know we have accessible dwelling units that community members can add housing to their own property, and that is a really great way to supplement and potentially have your own family members living within your own on your own property, but still having that anonymity, if it were. But as I believe the only renter on council at this point, I really appreciate this question because I feel there's a lot more that we can do as a council. When we talk about the average median income in Redmond, it's still $120,000, last I checked. And that is still pretty high for someone who is looking for affordable housing. And when there's only 10% of the units that are out there that are in that metric, in that affordable bucket, those units go really fast. So we have a lot of work to do to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to live in our community. And I think we can keep challenging our own policies and challenging our own ideas of what affordable housing is. I know we also have the opportunity to fill in, there's the missing, it's called the missing middle, and fill in housing choices. So we have a lot of apartments and we have a lot of big houses. We don't have a lot of small starter homes, condos, townhomes, and that sort of thing. So that is also something that we've been talking about a lot and looking at in our housing action plan.
Councilmember Kritzer?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think on top of all the really great kind of history that Councilmember Carson was giving, that part of the way that we have approached the issue of affordable housing that I think is great is working regionally. So we participate in this group called ARCH, it's a regional coalition on housing, where we and surrounding cities, we all choose projects together that will help to address affordability in our region. So we will sometimes help to fund a project in Bothell or a project in Kirkland or a project in Bellevue, and then they fund projects here in Redmond through this coalition work because we recognize that, affordability doesn't just stop right at our border. And I think that has been really cool. One project that you'll see coming up that's being built right now is called the Together Center, just right down here in downtown Redmond, and it's going to provide housing of a bunch of different levels of affordability, including some of that lower income housing, but also some workforce level housing is the term they use for people who are more in the 60 to 80% income level. So maybe some of our teachers or firefighters or baristas or other people who might fall into some of those different brackets that also, so we can have people who are working here, living here. And I think that's so important. Actually, part of that project that's really cool is that they also will provide office space for all kinds of human service nonprofits on site as well. So you will have a lot of great community-based organizations and people living all together in the same area, really close to where some other projects are. For example, only about a block away from here, we have some of our affordable senior housing. And I think, anyway, I would encourage you all, check out ARCH, a regional coalition on housing, because you can actually see, they have a map online of all the different projects that we've been funding over the years. And you can see just the hundreds of units that has created, but obviously we have more to do.
Council President?
Thank you. I think Councilmember Forsyth and Councilmember Kritzer touched upon a lot of the things that I was going to reiterate, but ultimately housing is about people, and I have met families who go to my son's school who are they get in a total panic because they're renting a house and then all of a sudden the owner wants to sell and they don't have a place where they can stay within the same school, in the same neighborhood. And we really need to change that. There needs to be options like townhomes or condos or things that, that allow people to stay in the neighborhood that they've selected. It should not be, well, your only options are downtown or this neighborhood. People should be able to live near the schools where they attend and where they teach at. So I keep pointing to Redmond 2050 because, as Councilmember Carson pointed out, these changes take a long time, looking at zoning and whatnot. So I would encourage all of you to be super vocal that, some of these changes are needed. I am forever humbled because my first apartment was a converted garage in a single family home, had the garage floor and everything. So I know that having that helped us live in Berkeley at the height of the .com era. So having these choices enables seniors to possibly stay in their place, age in their home so they can have extra income, and it also gives a good start for new couples or families that are starting out. So really get involved and let us know how we can make your city better.
So I'm just going to get everyone on the same page right now. Thank you all for that very robust answer. It is 7:42 according to my watch. We're actually done here at 8. I have a stack of questions that looks like this, but I think I want to get to, there's some particular questions that people, I think are, I've seen a few different times. So I'm going to ask council members if they'd like to share their thoughts on this. So one is that a big question about health through housing. I know we've been asked to amend this ordinance and would like to know if any of the council members would like to respond to that request to amend it, or maybe share what our process is from here to when that site possibly opens up. So throw that out there if anyone would like to step in and answer this one. Councilmember Carson?
So, yeah, I do think that this is a conversation that I'm hopeful that we have soon, and I do think there are some issues that we can, I call them guardrails, that we can put on this, not necessarily this project, but projects of this type, to make sure that we have the kind of facility and the kind of approach that people in Redmond and Bellevue, because it's going to impact Bellevue as well, believe will work to make this a success. And I think, to me, the biggest thing, I think we do need to see us look at making sure that we know who we have in the facility, which I think is going to take background checks to determine, okay, is this someone that we should have, because this neighborhood is a growing neighborhood. This is the Overlake Village neighborhood, and there are dozens of new apartment buildings going up, and we're seeing a lot more families live in apartments than we ever have. So it's very clear that we obviously have schools in the neighborhood too. So for all these reasons, knowing who we have in the facility is important, or the operator knowing who those are. So that would be one I would be supportive of. And I can think of a few others that I think we should certainly be talking about. And I think, we've talked about the timeline. It doesn't look like the county is ready to move forward for a permit, in the next couple of months. But I do want to make sure we have it in place, so when they do, we know exactly what we do and don't want.
Anyone else? Council Vice President?
Can you repeat the question just to?
I was trying to, the question was, will you be amending the ordinance 3059? And yes, what does that look like? And what is our process it's in front of the Planning Commission now? What does that process look like for the city moving forward? So I think that would be helpful for some clarity too.
Sure. So the question is, will we be amending ordinance 309?
3059.
3059. Thank you. The answer, I believe, is after the Planning Commission proposes recommendations, that we will see that back to council if there are changes to be made. So that is a yes. Again, a direct question. And then what goes into it, I believe, has been put in, this action was Monday last week. We forwarded additional findings of fact, public comment to the Planning Commission for their consideration as they go through that process and reviewing it. So right now, it's the ordinance itself, which is the land use ordinance, is in front of the Planning Commission and will be back to council. I'm not sure at what time, what the plan is for that.
I think it's January or February.
Early next year.
February, depending. I think they'll finish it up this year, so it'll be then.
Early next year. So meanwhile, the other things that are occurring is an occupancy agreement will be developed, and council is meeting on the 23rd at a study session to talk about the contents and parameters of that occupancy agreement. And I may be missing some of the details on that, but in terms of process, that's the next time we will be talking about the shape of that arrangement with the county in front of the council.
Anything else on that? Okay, this is another question that's been asked, and I think it kind of gets to the heart of the concern of health through housing. So I've saw quite a few questions of the concern that we're going to turn into Seattle. And so I think that that's the basis for the question, a lot of these questions, the concern about what will happen to our city. Oh, Councilmember Carson?
Well, I think we've all seen what just taking all the guardrails off does, and that's what you see in Seattle and Portland. And we don't have anything like that. You already see a difference in the fact that we don't allow camping in parks. The only way that you can continue to camp in a park in Redmond is if all the shelters are full. If you refuse to accept a place in a shelter, you will be removed from the park. So we don't allow, and that's all part of the Boise decision, if you're familiar with kind of how that happened. But there was a decision that said you can't remove people if they don't have anywhere to go. And so we will offer them housing or shelter. If they refuse it, then they still have to go. So it will not be, in my view, I don't think we're anywhere near what kind of what has happened in Seattle. I don't think we're likely to see that in Redmond because of some of the things we already do. We already have an outreach team, both with police, and we have a staff member that solely focuses on connecting homeless people with services. And her name's Tiza Rutherford, and you can look her up. And if you ever see someone that you think needs help, please reach out to her. She's asked us to make sure, and I think someone probably has one of her cards here, so we can give it to you afterwards if you like, and have a couple on hand to be able to hand to people. So I don't think we're at risk at all of looking like Seattle, because I think we understand what happens when you just say, sure, do whatever you like, and that's not a good outcome, so.
Thank you. Anyone else? Council President?
Thank you, Councilmember Carson. I love your answer, but my only change would be, that's what happens if you don't plan for it. If you just assume that it's not going to happen in our city, if you assume that it's not already here, it very much is. I know because I take my son to various parks, and we have like our own little safety thing that we do. Like if he needs to use the restroom, do you feel safe going into the restroom? I much rather have people be housed and get the services that they need and have a warm place where they can have time to focus and, get on a path to wellness, whether that's finding a job or getting mental health support or addiction support. So I feel confident in all the things that the city has already been doing. And I also feel good that we have a plan, because if we don't have a plan, then that's where things can spiral out, and we really have an obligation to house people. We have so much just wealth and opportunity, honestly, here, and this is something that we are capable of doing if we put in the effort. And I'm glad that we are partnering with King County and other nonprofits to address this problem head on. Thank you.
Councilmember Kritzer?
I think, one part of the discussion that I've heard and concerns from the community is in terms of who might be accessing the health or housing facility at the Silver Cloud, is whether it would be, where people would be coming from. And, one part of it is that there is a commitment to try to house people who are living nearby. So people who are living here in our community experiencing homelessness in Redmond, in Bellevue. And I know there's been some concerns about that, but we've gone back and forth quite a bit, and I've confirmed and asked with King County about that, optimally, they want to have people who are living closer by in housing, because, for people who are experiencing homelessness in one community, they don't necessarily want to be moved somewhere else. They have their own sense of community in place, and will do better if they're living near the place where they have been. So I think that's something that's really important, and something that we actually will want to look at as part of that occupancy agreement is to be able to make sure that we're looking at, being able to get people from nearby. We did get confirmation from our homeless outreach specialist that, I think she's contacted about 150 people this year, worked with them who are experiencing homelessness right here in Redmond. And she's identified that about 50 of them could get housed in the Silver Cloud. And I know there were some questions that initially there were questions about how many people, but that's the number that she's looking at right now. And so if we think about most right now, she's able to place a lot of people into permanent supportive housing in other places or shelters in other places. But what if people who are right here in our community could go and have a place to be able to call home? And I think that is exciting to think about it, really. If you see someone right now that may be living on the street in Redmond, that we could actually move towards having the resources for people to not be living on the street, but actually living in housing.
Anyone else? Shane, thank you for writing that down. I appreciate it. So Shane's asking, it's Shane, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Regarding the research about Health Through Housing initiative, will the city allow the public to examine or dispute some of the research that has been presented? Most of the sources that council members have listed appear to be organizations that have a conflict of interest to present research that will justify or gain support for their organization. We need actual residents and businesses who also have interest, but not political motivations, to have their research presented and heard. Research that may contradict the views that the council members have heard so far. Will the council allow for a back and forth dialogue and engage residents? Councilmember Forsyth. Thank you, Shane.
I love that question because I'm all about having dialogue and conversations. I think any one of us, if you reached out to us and asked us to go out for coffee to have that conversation, would be more than willing to go. I know I've done it. I know several of the council members here have done it. The problem comes in which we can't have more than one or more than three council members because we'd be breaking the law. So I think your best opportunity may be to reach out if there's any one of us that you want to have that dialogue with and have that conversation. I do want to reiterate, though, as I think we've all said, we definitely hear you when you come to these council meetings. We're definitely taking notes, and a lot of the feedback that you have given thus far has been incorporated into those findings of fact that is going to the Planning Commission and will be brought back to us. And a lot of the great suggestions that have been brought forward are going to be talked about when we have the interlocal agreement conversation in 2 weeks, I think it is. But as far as dialogue goes, I think we're all very open to having a real conversation. And we may not always agree, but learning and listening and growing is, I think, part of all of our core values.
Council Vice President?
So the last question, again, the direct question was, are we willing to have a dialogue? And I don't know if that is now. And I think the answer is yes. Again, again. The question I would have in response to engage in a dialogue is, where's this research coming from? And can we look at them side by side so that we can have a legitimate discussion about it? I don't know if you have research that I haven't seen, it isn't because I'm just looking for it, but mostly the amount of information you have up here in a council of 7 non-experts on housing. We have to educate ourselves, and so we use Dr. Google just like everybody else, or Dr. Bing if you prefer. But that's generally sort of where we're at, and we do count on you in the audience to help us learn, what's important to you, and also where to find the right information. I know that there's tons of information about housing, there's tons of information about public safety, but just in terms of considering all of that, we do get sort of digested information before we make a decision on policy stuff. So go back to this other question was on the process. One question we didn't answer was, how can you help? And at this point, what I understand on ordinance 3059 is that you can provide comment to the Planning Commission for their consideration. And then you can also continue to provide comment to the council on the occupancy agreement, because that's coming up. I don't think we have an opportunity for participating in our study session, but you can certainly watch us on TV. We're thrilling every Tuesday. So those are definitely some ways that you can continue to get on record for us to consider those things. And at some point, it's, the same information over and over again, but also we never know, and we can't know something that we don't already know. So if you don't take the time to do that and share that with us, we would certainly really appreciate it. Thank you.
And just for the date, thank you very much, Council Vice President. The Planning Commission is having a public hearing on December 1st. So that is a perfect opportunity to share your comments with them, and you can speak, or you can send them in just via email as well. That's also a good opportunity as well. Councilmember Kritzer.
Thanks so much to my fellow council members for your thoughts on that. Just add, I appreciate the question about resources and data, because I think, in general, it's a value I hold dear, is governing as a data-driven decision maker and really researching the policies that we're passing. So I take my role very seriously. I'd say, even though we're definitely not the experts, what's great is that in our area, we have a lot of really smart people and organizations that are studying this topic. And so I typically look to a lot of research from the organizations that really specialize in looking at this challenge, which, it is a really difficult challenge that our region is facing. And so trying to look at, what strategies have worked there. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, reading through also best practices that have come from other cities that have similarly faced these issues, and seeing how is it working for them, because this is actually not just something that's specific to the King County area, but it's also happening in lots of other metro areas around the United States. I just saw a great news report that was talking about all these different cities and how they're tackling it. So I think that's a really good path for us to be able to do, is to I think, as you said, to be able to really look at a lot of different sources, to be able to make sure that we're understanding the best ways to tackle this. But I will say that I think we're lucky in our area. We have so many people that are experts in this topic, and I try to also just have conversations with them, and then glean that for some of the policy making we do here. So that's just a little bit of the insight into how we make these decisions ourselves.
So unfortunately, we're out of time tonight. I think one thing that we could...
Not a conversation, not a dialogue.
Sir, so one of the things I would say is that we definitely had a lot more questions than we had time.
Conversation is two-way. If it's just one way, that's not a conversation.
This is lecturing, not conversation.
So as I was saying, our time is up here tonight. I do really appreciate individuals sharing all their questions with us.
You called 1 hour earlier, and then you chose to not read it.
Natalie, can you help us out? Thanks. So obviously, we'll have more of these conversations in the future. I do want to thank all of the council members for sharing their thoughts with us. I want to thank our community that's been online the whole time, chatting away and sharing their thoughts. We didn't get to any of their questions as well. But I do want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We'll have another one of these next late winter, early spring. As you know, the council members and I have emails. You can get a hold of us if you'd like. And the only other thing I was going to say is every time I took a sip out of this, I kept thinking it was going to be fizzy, but it wasn't. So I don't know if anyone else had water. There's a few snacks outside if you'd like to take something on the way out. But really, thank you all. Thank you to the staff as well for being here this evening to take care of us. So thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
This is ridiculous.